The wind howled through the narrow canyon, carrying flakes of snow that stung Clara's cheeks and whipped at her cloak. Each step she took was a struggle, the thick, powdery snow clinging to her boots and slowing her progress. She had been running for hours, though she didn't know from what exactly, just the gnawing weight of fear, the heavy sense that someone or something from the town's gossip-riddled streets was following her. Whispers of her name, rumors that painted her in a false light, haunted her every step. In her mind, every shadow could be someone coming to harm her. Every sound in the wind was a warning. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the cold biting deeper with every pause to catch her breath. The little cabin at the edge of the valley appeared ahead, its thin smoke rising lazily into the gray sky. She had stumbled across it once before while gathering firewood, a forgotten structure at the edge of the world, and it had remained etched in her memory as a safe place, or at least as safe as anything in her life had ever been. Suddenly, the crunch of hooves on the packed snow made her spin around. Her pulse leapt. There, emerging from the storm, was a figure on horseback. At first, she couldn't tell if it was a threat or a savior. The man was tall, his broad shoulders draped in a weather-beaten coat, hat pulled low over his eyes. Snow clung to his boots and the edges of his cloak, but his posture was steady, almost commanding, as though the wind and storm themselves obeyed him. He dismounted slowly, the leather of his boots creaking against the snow. His eyes, blue and sharp despite the ice glinting on his lashes, found hers immediately. And in that instant, Clara felt something shift inside her. A flicker of hope, a dangerous, intoxicating flicker she hadn't dared feel in years. He didn't speak at first, just extended his gloved hand toward her. The gesture was simple, almost mundane, but to Clara it felt monumental. Here was someone offering help without demand, without accusation, without judgment. She hesitated, her instinct screaming to flee, to vanish into the snow, to return to the safety of her solitude. But something in his gaze, steady, unwavering, patient, pulled her forward. She stepped cautiously toward him, each footfall a battle against the snow and the fear that had ruled her life. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling, barely audible over the wind. The man's lips curved into a faint, reassuring smile. Eli, he said simply. I've been riding through the valley. I saw the smoke from the cabin. Figured someone might need help. Her hands shook as she wrapped them tighter around her cloak. She had never known a life where someone would simply offer assistance without expecting something in return. Every adult in her world had always had a price, a condition. But Eli's presence radiated calm authority. He didn't demand her trust, he merely invited it. She nodded once, uncertainly. I need shelter. Just for the night, she admitted, voice small, almost apologetic. The words felt strange, foreign, as if she were admitting something forbidden. Eli gave her a reassuring nod, then gestured toward the cabin. We'll get you inside, warm up, then you can figure out what comes next. His tone was soft, yet it carried the kind of strength that made her feel grounded, like the snow and wind couldn't sweep her away as long as he was there. The walk to the cabin was slow. Eli stayed slightly ahead, allowing her the space to gather herself, yet close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence brushing against her back. Snowflakes drifted lazily down, catching in her hair and on her eyelashes, but the terror she had carried for weeks began to ebb just enough for her to breathe. When they reached the cabin, Eli pushed the door open gently, and the smell of dry wood and lingering smoke greeted them. Inside, the air was warmer, softer, a small bubble of safety against the harsh winter outside. Clara sank into a chair near the hearth, shivering. She wrapped her arms around herself, letting the warmth seep in slowly, cautiously, afraid it might vanish if she let go too soon. Eli knelt down beside her, his presence calm but commanding. He didn't touch her unless she sought the reassurance, but his gaze held her as if he could shield her from every harsh thing she had endured. You're safe here, he said, his voice low and steady. No one can touch you here. Not tonight. For the first time in years, Clara believed him. The fear that had been a constant shadow in her life did not vanish entirely, but it became something she could manage. And for the first time in that long, lonely winter, she felt the tiniest flicker of something dangerous and exhilarating, trust. The snowstorm raged outside, but inside the cabin, a fragile warmth began to grow, not just from the fire, but from the presence of someone who could see her, truly see her, without judgment or cruelty. And that warmth, Clara realized, might just be enough to carry her into a future she had never dared to imagine. The snowstorm continued to pound outside, drumming against the cabin walls like the heartbeat of a distant, restless world. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, sending golden light dancing across the rough wooden floorboards. Clara sat by the hearth, arms wrapped tightly around herself, trying to absorb both the physical warmth of the cabin and the strange, unfamiliar warmth of Eli's presence. He moved quietly around the room, checking the small woodpile, adjusting the kettle above the fire, but never breaking the calm bubble that had formed between them. You don't have to say anything, he said softly, finally settling onto a chair across from her. You've already done enough just by walking through that door. Clara's eyes flicked up to meet his, and for a moment, the world outside, the cold, the storm, the fear, faded entirely. She wanted to speak, to explain the endless days of loneliness, the whispers of the town, the nights spent shivering under threadbare blankets. But the words tangled in her throat. She had learned over the years that opening her heart often invited pain, and she wasn't sure she was ready to risk it again. Eli didn't push. He simply sat there, quiet, steady, a presence she could cling to when the fear threatened to creep back in. He poured them each a cup of the strong, smoky coffee he'd brewed, sliding hers gently toward her on the table. The small act of care, ordinary and unassuming, struck Clara with more impact than any grand gesture ever could. He was giving her trust before demanding it, patience before asking for answers, and it was almost more than she knew how to bear. She lifted the cup with trembling hands and sipped, the bitterness biting against the sweetness of the firelight and the safety she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. Her gaze wandered to the window, where snow whipped against the glass, a chaotic storm in contrast to the calm interior. It reminded her of the life she had run from, unpredictable, harsh, and cruel. But here, in the cabin with Eli, there was stillness. There was shelter. There was the quiet possibility of something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine for years, hope. Finally, her voice broke the silence, barely more than a whisper. I haven't felt safe in a long time, she admitted, looking down at her hands. Not really safe, not since, her voice faltered. The memory of endless days living under judgment and fear, of being watched and blamed, threatened to overwhelm her. Eli leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. I can't undo the past, he said, his voice calm but resolute. I can't erase what happened, but I can make sure it doesn't touch you here. Not anymore, not while you're under this roof. Clara swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into that simple truth, but trust had been so thoroughly broken in her life. It felt almost dangerous to allow herself to feel anything but caution. Still, there was something in the strength of his gaze, the warmth of his presence, the way he seemed to understand her without needing explanations, that made her heart pound, not from fear this time, but from something far more complicated. Something that hinted at the stirrings of trust, and perhaps even affection. The storm outside slowed, the wind's fury giving way to soft flurries that danced in the air like tiny crystals. Clara finally allowed herself to exhale, a long, trembling breath that had been held for years. She looked up at Eli, and he met her gaze without expectation, without demand, just with the quiet reassurance that he would stay until she was ready. Minutes passed, hours. They didn't speak much. There was no need. The silence was comfortable, charged with a quiet intimacy that came not from words but from presence. Every glance, every small gesture, the way he adjusted the fire, the careful way he handed her the coffee, the steady calm of his eyes, said more than words ever could. At one point, Clara dared to move closer, sitting on the floor near the fire rather than the chair. Eli didn't react, didn't recoil, didn't push her away. He simply watched over her with a quiet protectiveness, his eyes never leaving hers. It was the kind of care she had almost forgotten existed, the kind that didn't demand anything in return. For the first time in years, Clara realized that her heart could race without fear. It could race because of something good, something safe, something worth holding onto. The flicker of courage returned. She dared to imagine a world where she didn't have to run, where someone might stand beside her not out of obligation, but out of choice. And in that small cabin, with the firelight flickering against the walls and snowflakes clinging to the window panes, Clara took her first, tentative steps toward believing in herself again, and toward the possibility that Eli's steady presence might be the beginning of something that could heal her heart completely. Morning light spilled softly across the cabin, turning the frost on the window panes into tiny prisms that scattered gold and pink across the wooden floor. The snowstorm that had raged through the night had subsided, leaving a blanket of untouched white across the valley. Clara stood near the window, gazing out at the sparkling landscape, feeling a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. For the first time in years, she felt like the world beyond the cabin didn't hold only fear and judgment. It might hold safety, freedom, and even possibility. Eli's presence was steady behind her, quiet yet undeniable. He hadn't moved much during the night, remaining near the hearth, watching over her as she slept in fits of tension and unease. That silent vigilance had been a balm to her frayed nerves, a reassurance she hadn't realized she needed so desperately. Now, as she looked out over the snow-covered valley, she realized that she wanted to stay, not just in the cabin, but near him. He came closer, his boots muffled by the thick rug covering the floor, and stood beside her. Their shoulders almost brushed, and Clara felt a flutter of emotion that made her heart race. Not from fear, but from the quiet connection that had built between them over a single, intense night. "You're stronger than you think," Eli said, his voice low but carrying over the crackle of the fire and the soft wind outside. "You've been through so much, and yet here you are." Clara turned to look at him, searching his face for any trace of mockery or judgment, but found none. Only quiet respect and understanding. I don't know if I'm strong," she admitted. "I've spent so long hiding, pretending I'm fine, pretending I can handle everything on my own. But the truth is, I'm afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of being hurt again." Eli's gaze softened. He reached out, lightly placing a hand near hers, not touching, but close enough that the warmth of his presence was almost tangible. "Afraid is human," he said. "It doesn't make you weak. It makes you real, and it's the first step to being brave." Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of relief, of recognition, of feeling seen for the first time in a long time. She had spent years carrying her pain in silence, thinking that showing vulnerability would make her weak. But Eli's quiet confidence, his patient and unwavering presence, told her that there was power in opening herself up, even just a little. They spent the next few minutes in comfortable silence, watching the valley. The snow glistened in the morning sun, untouched and pristine, and Clara felt a surge of hope. She could leave the fears of the past behind, at least for now. She could allow herself to exist in this moment, safe, warm, and not alone. Finally, she spoke, her voice stronger than she expected. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can trust anyone, again." Eli smiled, a small, reassuring curve of his lips. "Then take it one step at a time," he said. "You don't have to decide everything right now. Just take the next step. And if you fall, I'll be here to help you back up. No judgment, no conditions." Clara let out a shaky laugh, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't simple," he admitted, "but it doesn't have to be scary either. You just have to let yourself feel, let yourself be human, and trust that someone will stand with you when it's hard." She looked at him again, really looked, noticing the strength in his stance, the warmth in his eyes, the quiet confidence that seemed to say he would never abandon her. Her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something else, something tentative, fragile, and utterly new. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the crisp morning air fill her lungs. The snow outside sparkled like diamonds, but the real light, the one that made her heart lift, was here, in this cabin, in the presence of someone who had offered her more than safety. He had offered her respect, understanding, and a chance to believe in herself again. I'm ready to try, she said softly, almost to herself. Eli's eyes softened further, and he nodded once, approvingly, almost reverently. Then we'll take it together, he said. Step by step, the snow glistened outside, and Clara felt an unfamiliar sensation settle in her chest, hope. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was steady, like the fire crackling in the hearth, like the mountains around them, like the unwavering presence of the man who had stayed by her side all night. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. The storm outside was gone, but more importantly, the storm inside her, the fear, the doubt, the isolation, was beginning to lift. And with Eli by her side, she could finally believe that maybe, just maybe, the world could be a place where she belonged, a place where her heart could feel safe again. And as they stood together on the porch, gazing at the snow-covered valley, Clara realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think in a long time, that this calm, this trust, this quiet connection, might be the beginning of the life she had once thought impossible.